Today, we're talking about major injury updates around the Washington Commanders. We're also going to be talking about what the Commanders must fix as this season continues. And so before we go ahead and we jump into it, I first want to remind you to hit that subscribe button, just like Jayden Daniels is going to be hitting Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel, Zach Ertz, and many others for multiple touchdowns this upcoming season. And so in exchange for hitting that subscribe button, I'm going to give you nothing but daily content around the Washington Commanders. And so make sure that you hit that like, you hit that subscribe, and you join the Washington Commanders Insider family as we talk nothing but Washington Commanders football. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and let's jump into it. And let's start with the latest injury updates around the Washington Commanders. And so we're going to be paraphrasing what Dan Quinn had to say in his presser. And so the first two players that he talks about are Austin Ekeler and Dietrich Wise Jr. And so Dan Quinn confirms that both of these players are in fact going to be out for the season. And Dan Quinn says that he is definitely bummed about this. And he said that, look, both of these guys are terrific teammates, both on and off the field, and just bummed that the season is going to be over for both of these players. And so next, Dan Quinn starts to talk about Jayden Daniels. And so coming into this presser, I believe a lot of people wanted to hear what Dan Quinn had to say about Jayden Daniels and just the latest update here. And so, over the last couple days, we've been talking about just some information that was out there that Jayden Daniels had to get an MRI on his knee. We never got the confirmation from the team. And I think that this is something that really started to pick up a little bit more steam yesterday, especially talking about what Jay Glazer had to say after the primetime football game went off. And then also, too, talking about what J.P. Finley had to say as well. And so Dan Quinn did confirm today that Jayden Daniels did, in fact, have to get an MRI on his knee. He said that he is day-to-day. He said that he's unsure about Sunday and that he will know some more about him Wednesday. And he said Jayden Daniels, just like all the rest of the injured players that we're going to talk about, they're going to have to hit the markers in order to get back out there on the field. And so this is something that Dan Quinn really talked about throughout training camp, especially when it came down to Terry McLaurin or Sam Cosmi, whoever was out via injury. You have to hit these markers in order to get back, and they just don't want to skip any steps. And so some of the things that he mentioned when talking about coming back and just hitting these certain benchmarks and things like that. He talks about strength. He talks about movement, speed, stopping, starting, changing of direction, pivot. These are some of the things that they're definitely going to be looking for, and they're just not going to skip one step with Jayden Daniels or any of these other players. And so next, shifting focus here and looking at the rest of the players that were listed as injured, and we get some updates about them. And so he talks about Jonathan Jones, he talks about Noah Brown, and he also talks about John Bates. And so with these players, this is definitely a tough situation because they have soft tissue injuries. And so, with Jonathan Jones, he is dealing with a hamstring, and then with John Bates and Noah Brown, they are dealing with growing injuries. And so one of the things that he says about John Bates and Noah Brown is that it's a long shot right now for both of those players to play. And so obviously we still have some time, until Sunday. And then also too, you still have some time to see what these players are going to look like and just really what they're able to do by Wednesday and Friday and so on. And so we'll see what happens. But that is one of the things that Dan Quinn says is that it is a long shot right now for John Bates and Noah Brown. And so next, I wanted to go and talk about just some of the things that Dan Quinn talked about as far as, things that he just noticed out of that game against the Packers and just really things that this team is going to have to clean up moving forward. So, the first thing that he talks about, he's asked about, how the team started and everything else against the Packers. And he said that, look, he just didn't like the start on both sides of the ball, and he didn't like the balance as well. And so he mentions, the pass run balance there. And this kind of goes into, I think, points that I've talked about several times, dating back to last season and really leading into this season. Balance is going to be huge for the Commanders. And I think that the run game is going to be super important, especially when it comes down to protecting Jayden Daniels, because one of the stats that I saw here on Packers.com is that the Packers were able to get 12 QB hits on him by 8 different players. And really, they don't have a whole bunch of success against mobile quarterbacks. And so the fact that they were able to get this type of success against Jayden Daniels, I think that they feel very good about their defense. And I will give them credit for that. But I think that the way that you slow down really a pass rush is that you have to run the football. And so I think that I've said this before. And I think by doing this now, you keep a defense guessing. They're not just going to be able to get into these exotic blitzes and things like that and just come after Jayden Daniels, because I do feel like that now what you're going to see is teams are probably going to look at this clip and not this clip, the game where the Packers beat the Commanders, and they're going to try to take a lot of that stuff that the Packers did, and they're going to try to mimic that stuff, because that is exactly what the NFL is. It's a copycat league. And so I think that this is some of the stuff that Jayden Daniels and this offense is going to face. And how do you get those defenses? Well, you have to get on balance. And so a great point there by Dan Quinn. And so the next thing that he talks about really is just taking away these long, explosive plays from opposing teams. And so talking about their offense being able to go down the field. And so he mentions, the tight ends too as well. So he's asked about the tight ends. And really, when you go back and you look at the stats for the Packers, the tight ends, man, they did a terrific job against the Commanders. And so with Tucker Kraft, 6 receptions, 124 yards, 20.7 was his average. He had a touchdown, 57 was his longest. And those 6 receptions were on 7 targets. And so he only missed 1. And then with Luke Musgrave, 2 receptions, 32 yards, 16 yards was his average, 23 was his longest, and that was on 2 targets as well. So he caught both of those. And so, the Packers tight ends, they were able to make some plays down the field. And one of the things that Dan Quinn talked about is really, the defense having their eyes in the right places. And so it sounds like, the defense was maybe fooled, looking one way and got caught, kind of napping out there defensively. But I'll say this, I think that still, even with the performance this last game against the Packers, I'm encouraged with what we saw defensively out there. And I just think that this team is definitely, ahead of schedule there defensively. I think that they probably got worn down a bit, because really, when you look at the balance, one of the things that you have to think about is that the Commanders, they had some good field position throughout this game. It's just that the Packers continued to get the stops and create negative plays and flip the field. So, that goes into balance. And so you got to be able to play complementary football, which is something that Dan Quinn talks about as well, complementary football. And so those are some of the things that this team is going to have to clean up, for the rest of the season, and especially as they get ready to take on the Raiders here in week 3. And so, with that being said, I wanted to go ahead and just talk about some other things that Dan Quinn mentioned here. And so one of the things that he talks about is just replacing Austin Ekeler. And he says that, look, at this point in time, it's going to be several players. And so it will be players, or several different players will be featured in different ways to try to replace Austin Ekeler, not similar, different ways to try to replace that production. And so he gives us some insight there to that. And then, lastly, one of the things that Dan Quinn does talk about here is just really with all these injuries and things like that, he just talks about that this is why, having that complete roster is going to take everybody. And really, it's just a puzzle that you just really want to get it put together. And so, look, it's a long NFL season, definitely not pressing the panic button. It is week 2. Yes, the injuries have hit this team. Yes, there's definitely some questions now with Jayden Daniels having to get this MRI. And so we'll find some more out about him. But there's still a long season. And this is exactly why you get the roster constructed the way that you did. And starting with Jayden Daniels, this is exactly why you go out and you get Marcus Mariota. This is exactly why you signed him, because he stepped up last season when Jayden Daniels went down, and when they had to take him out of that Dallas game, and then also to another game too earlier in that season last year. And so this is why you go out and you sign him. And so I think that the Commanders should definitely not rush Jayden Daniels back. And we're hoping too that with Mariota, he's definitely not injured too, because remember during training camp, he was dealing with the Achilles tendonitis. And so hopefully he's ready to rock because this team is definitely going to need him. And so again, I just think that, look, if Jayden Daniels, is trending towards playing, I think maybe this is the week where you go ahead and you sit him and then you get him back hopefully the next week after that, because the last thing that you want is for Jayden Daniels to be out there, on, a knee that's just not quite right. And then he goes out there, he's trying to get mobile and things like that, and just kind of maybe injures it a little bit more. And so you just don't want to take that chance with him. If you can get the rest now, you do it now, especially with your franchise quarterback. And so lastly, before we jump out of here, and just thinking about Austin Ekeler and just what this team could possibly do. And so I was wondering, would this team go out? Would they sign a free agent? Would they trade for a running back? And it looks like that Adam Peters has decided to sign a running back. And so this is Adam Schefter, and this is him reporting that they went out and they have signed Chase Edmonds to their practice squad. And so talking about the Commanders here. And so Chase Edmonds, if you're not familiar with him, look, he had some great years, I think, with the Arizona Cardinals, and definitely it looked like that he was going to be off and just really to the races here once he got out of his 2021 season, because that was one of his best years. I believe he went to the Dolphins in free agency, and like the year before with the Cardinals, had a very good year. I mean, he had 116 carries, 592 yards. He averaged 5.1 a carry. And then also, too, when you look at just what he was able to do as a pass receiver in that year, 43 receptions on 53 targets, 311 yards, 7.2 was his average there. And even 2020, he had a very good year. In 2020, 448 yards rushing. He also had 402 yards receiving. And so, definitely a guy that can be, a dual threat type of back. And then he just went to Miami via free agency. Didn't necessarily work out. I believe they traded him to Denver, and then he was released that offseason, went on to sign with the Bucks. He was there with them in 2023 and just really hasn't found his way since then. I believe 2024, it says that he was out due to a knee injury, and he hadn't played since. And so let's see what happens with the Commanders. They do have some time to go ahead and get him into some shape, because I do feel like that this is where you allow Chris Rodriguez Jr. to go ahead and step up. You allow Bill to take a step forward and Jeremy McNichols and really see what you have. And then, the X factor here is you still have Deebo Samuel. And so I know Deebo Samuel is definitely wide receiver too, but I do think that Cliff Kingsbury can use him in the backfield to go along with these guys. And so you do not have to necessarily throw Chase Edmonds out there, but let's see how this works out. So anyway, you guys let me know in the comments here, what do you guys think about this most recent signing to the practice squad? Once again, Chase Edmonds will be signing or has signed here with the Commanders. Then also, too, let me know what you guys are thinking with this injury update. Like I said before, I think that, regardless of what happens, I'm not pressing the panic button, but I'm definitely not going to rush Jayden Daniels out there. I mean, this team finally has a franchise quarterback. And look, a lot of the goals and things that this team wants to get done, it starts with your franchise quarterback. Look, I get it's a team game and everything else, but the fact that the Commanders finally have a franchise quarterback that we know he can get it done, I just don't think it's necessary to rush him out there against the Raiders. I think that you can get by this upcoming week without him, and then you can get him ramped up for the week after that. So you guys let me know in the comments what you guys are thinking there, along with these players that do have, again, some soft tissue injuries, talking about John Bates, Jonathan Jones, Noah Brown, who we know is definitely he's supposed to be counted on a lot here at that wide receiver position. And so that means that Jalen Lane, Luke McCaffrey, somebody else is going to have to step up. And so, as we always say, look, go Commanders, and I will see you guys on the next one. All right, peace.